Thanks to Baron of Dice, Grey Matter Gaming, and Monument Hobbies for sponsoring this video. The Thousand Suns have been riding high for almost all of 10th edition, bolstered by some incredible datasheets, a bonkers detachment, and a borderline busted army rule. Even after some points increases, they're still dominating tables around the world. The new Hexwarp Thrallband detachment aims at changing their playstyle to one more focused on board control, though the result doesn't quite get there. As usual, you can find a written companion to this video on goonhammer.com, link in the description. Detachment Rule: Flow of Magic. Specific areas of the battlefield can be within your army's flow of magic. Your deployment zone is always within your flow. At the start of any phase, if you control at least half of the objective markers in No Man's Land, until the end of the phase, No Man's Land is in your flow of magic. At the start of any phase, if you control at least half of the markers in your opponent's deployment zone, then until the end of that phase, your opponent's deployment zone is also in your flow of magic. When you make a psychic attack with a Thousand Suns model in your army, reroll wound rolls of 1. If that model is wholly within your army's flow of magic, add 1 to the wound roll instead. This is a big hoop to jump through, and it's impossible to talk about this detachment without comparing it to the Cult of Magic, one of the game's best detachments. There are some interesting effects here, but on the whole, this doesn't give you anything you couldn't already get from your datasheets and doesn't push you to use different units from a Cult of Magic army. You're likely wondering why you'd even want this rule. After all, your characters attached to rubrics already have the ability to reroll 1s to wound, and Magnus gives you +1 to hit and wound with psychic weapons, so you already have access to that as well. And even then, +1 to wound is neat, but doesn't mean much for attacks that already have anti-infantry 4 up, such as those in squad champions. There's some marginal upside here for Magnus, who wants to be able to reroll 1s to wound, but that's pretty small, and as soon as he's within your flow, he loses any benefit from this detachment. It's not great, and that's before you consider that you're giving up sustained hits or devastating wounds for all of your psychic attacks by not taking the Cult of Magic. If you're still planning on building around this, it's worth noting that you can get around the loss of devastating wounds from the Cult of Magic a little bit by running Psychers, who get devastating wounds on their own, namely Magnus, Exalted Sorcerers, Terminator Sorcerers, and Zangor Shamans. Demon Princes also like having either bonus as a way to punch up, though again, that +1 to wound only matters if you're not going to have Magnus around. These units largely have anti-abilities on their psychic attacks that make +1 to wounds kind of irrelevant. The units you want to focus on here the most are probably Exalted Sorcerers, who have solid devastating wound psychic attacks that, at strength 6, can benefit substantially from +1 to wound, and who already would reroll 1s to wound from being embedded in a unit of rubrics. And again, you already get +1 to wound on psychic powers from Magnus's aura, so what exactly does this do for you? The other big challenge with this detachment is that its attachment rule only does anything for your psychic attacks, meaning it's a dusty fart for rubrics and scarabs outside of their champion models. And without something like Ensorcelled Infusion to turn regular attacks into psychic ones, you'll need to lean heavy on characters and squad leaders with this detachment to make use of it. That's already the case for the Cult of Magic detachment, but here you just lack that same raw power, meaning you'll struggle even more with vehicle and monster targets. Even Magnus is going to struggle to kill a Rhino without full rerolls to hit and wound. There may be some future time, post-Codex, where this detachment has sudden value, but today doesn't seem to be that day. The enhancements here are okay, except for Noctilith Mantle, but they're up against stiff competition in the Cult of Magic, where all 4 options are bangers. The one advantage here is that none of these enhancements have had their points cost hiked up yet, so they're at least cheaper. The strength boost to psychic weapons with Arcane Might is fine, and can sometimes stack with +1 to wounds to get a little spicy. Empowered Manifestation is only really effective on a Demon Prince or a Terminator Sorcerer. On the Sorcerer, it lets you get your rerolls to hit on a target within 24 inches instead of 18 inches, which is alright. On the Demon Prince, however, this extends the range on their Stealth Aura to 12 inches. That 24-inch diameter Stealth Aura is huge, literally and figuratively. As an added bonus, you can pick a unit 12 inches away to gain precision with his other psychic ability. Empiric Onslaught is a solid upgrade on psychic characters, upgunning their ranged psychic weapons with an extra 3 attacks. It's particularly good in the Exalted Sorcerer, where you'll get D6 plus 3, D3 damage attacks with devastating wounds. But the requirement to be within your army's flow of magic means it's likely not worth the points. Noctilith Mantle is last and least. It's seldom worth taking, sacrificing rituals to always be in the flow of magic. Losing out on your best tricks is not worth the detachment buff. This detachment gains its strength through its stratagems, which have some solid utility and defensive buffs. They're all one command point, meaning you can get them free with the Echoes of the Warp Kabbalistic Ritual. They're interesting, but not as good as the Cult of Magic set. Warding Hex needs you to jump through a few hoops to get the most of it. Most of the time it'll mean holding 2 objectives mid-table before you can sticky anything in no man's land, but you can use this to sticky your home objective early and leave it behind. Wrath of the Doomed is cute, but the reason you're not charging into combat with your models is that they're generally pretty bad at it. This is best on some Scarab Terminators, but most of the time you're better off avoiding combat altogether, since losing multiple Scarabs in melee is going to ruin your day, and they tend to be disappointing when they fight. Strands of Time is useful, but you'll probably only be using half of it. Fallback and Shoot is a key ingredient missing from the Cult of Magic, and it's great to have for a unit of flamer-toting rubrics. You'll almost never want to charge back into combat after falling back with a Thousand Suns unit though, so that second part probably isn't that important. Through the Veil lets you deep strike your Rubric Marines, or deep strike even closer with your Scarabs, so long as it's within your army's flow of magic, at the cost of losing the ability to charge. This is great for getting those Warp Flamers where you need them, or to drop a unit and Temporal Surge it onto an objective. Scouring Warp Flame lets you strip cover from a unit, which your Rubric Bolters will really appreciate. Your Scarabs and Forge Fiends will like it too. Kaleidoscopic Tempest is a solid defensive buff, essentially the smokescreen stratagem for Psyker units. It's a strong pick on Magnus if you're expecting a large number of incoming attacks, though you won't need this if you're getting stealth from a Demon Prince with the Empowered Manifestation enhancement. There isn't a lot of difference between playing this detachment and the Cult of Magic. Part of this is that the Thousand Suns don't have that many units to work with, and the other part is that the detachment rule and army rule push you towards the same character-heavy benefits. There's some intended value in taking Scarab Terminators with this detachment, but without Ensorcelled Infusion and stackable effects like Devastating Wounds or full rerolls to hit and wound, their value is pretty limited. Instead, you'll find the utility this detachment gets will likely be more out of the ability to deep strike rubrics onto the table, as well as your ability to protect multiple units with an enhanced Demon Prince. If you do want to go heavy on Scarabs, there are some tools here to support that. Fighting on Death is clearly intended for them, Scouring Warp Flame is definitely best on Inferno Combi Bolters, and Strands of Time helps shore up a key weakness for the unit, especially since you don't have access to the Umbralefic Crystal. You could try working out a list with a few squads of Scarabs and a Demon Prince for support. Terminators who are both -1 to be hit at range and -1 to be wounded seems pretty solid, but they'll struggle to damage vehicles. Vehicles which, more often than not, are geared up to kill units just like them. Given how this detachment focuses on +1 to wound and how variable Magnus can be without full rerolls, it may be the case that this army wants to build without Magnus. That's pretty dire given how good he is, but if you're really dead set on trying this, it might be worth testing. Let's see if we can summon some strengths and weaknesses here. It's got some good stratagems which give you new tools for playing with rubrics, especially Deep Strike. It gives Magnus the ability to reroll once to wound when he's not within your flow of magic. This detachment also works pretty well with solo characters. However, the detachment rule is redundant, already getting you something you get from units that you're already taking in every Thousand Suns army. The detachment only benefits characters and champions with no ability to give unit attacks the psychic tag. The power level is pretty low overall, and the detachment rule doesn't give you rerolls and +1 to wound at the same time. It's pretty clear that the rules writers were rightfully worried about making something too good for a faction which is already among the game's best. While that's fair, this detachment's cardinal sin isn't being underpowered, it's that this doesn't push you to use different units or tactics to the Cult of Magic. That detachment already buffs psychic attacks, focuses around your characters, has stronger stratagems, fewer hoops to jump through, and less overlap with existing abilities. If you already reroll 1s to wound from rubrics and have +1 to wound from Magnus, why would you even bother with this? If you'd like to read more tactical analysis and see how we'd mold this detachment into a useful list, head on over to goonhammer.com and consider backing us on Patreon so you can hop on our Discord and say this detachment is good actually. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Baron of Dice, Monument Hobbies, and Grey Matter Gaming for sponsoring this video. I've been Cabalite McMagicman, recording from my Silver Tower. Thanks for watching.